Around 500 million years ago, during the Cambrian period, Earth looked nothing like it does today. There was land, but it was completely empty. No trees, grass, or animals. The ground was just dry, rocky, and barren. But even though there were no visible life forms, tiny living things did exist. A thin layer of microbes, tiny organisms, covered the rocks and soil. These microbes, which included cyanobacteria, a type of bacteria that can make food from sunlight, had been the only life on land for billions of years. For a long time, cyanobacteria were the only living things outside the ocean. They spread by sending out tiny filaments, thin strands of cells, to start new colonies. But that was about to change. New life forms were about to arrive on land. These new arrivals would have a huge impact on the planet, making it colder, taking oxygen out of the ocean, and eventually causing a massive extinction event that wiped out 85% of species, including 1/4 of all marine families. This event is known today as the End-Ordovician extinction, the first of the Big Five mass extinctions in Earth's history. So what caused this disaster? Scientists believe that it all started when the first tiny plants began to grow on land. We don't know exactly what the first land plant looked like, but scientists have a pretty good idea. Unlike animals, plants don't fossilize well. Instead of leaving behind full fossils, they mostly leave behind tiny particles called spores, which they use to reproduce. These spores are similar to the ones found in ferns and mosses today. In the 1990s, scientists found ancient spores in Saudi Arabia and the Czech Republic, dating back 462 million years, right around the time when the planet was cooling. Since these spores had a thick protective coating, scientists could tell they came from land plants rather than plants that lived in water. Aquatic plants don't need thick coverings since water protects them, but land plants need them to survive harsh conditions like wind and dryness. Even older spores were found in Argentina in 2010, dating back 470 million years. But scientists think plants may have actually arrived on land even earlier, maybe 515 million years ago, in the middle of the Cambrian period. They figured this out using a method called the molecular clock, which estimates how long ago a species appeared by studying DNA changes over time. If you are still with me, like and subscribe for more of this interesting videos. Once plants reached land, they quickly started diversifying, spreading into different types. The spores found in Argentina came from at least 5 different species, meaning there were already small communities of plants back then. These first land plants were non-vascular, meaning they didn't have roots or tubes to carry water and nutrients like modern plants do. Scientists aren't sure exactly which plants they were, but they were probably moss-like and related to green algae or liverworts. These early plants were pioneers, slowly adapting to survive outside water. They clung to rocks, releasing their spores near the water so that waves could carry them, just like their ancestors had done in the ocean. Over time, they evolved new features to survive on land, like hard-walled spores and waxy coatings, called cuticles, that prevented them from drying out. So you may ask, how did small plants change everything? At first, these plants just grew on rocks, but that simple act had huge consequences for the planet. Today, scientists call this type of plant growth cryptogamic cover, which refers to the mix of moss, algae, and fungi that stick to rocks. These organisms don't just sit there. They slowly break down rocks, releasing minerals like phosphorus, potassium, and iron into the environment. To understand how this happened millions of years ago, scientists conducted experiments with modern moss. They found that moss-covered rocks released 60 times more phosphorus than bare rocks. Once phosphorus was freed from the rocks, rainwater carried it into the oceans. Geologists have found proof of this process in ancient rock formations in New Mexico and Texas. These rocks contain phosphorus deposits from the late Ordovician period, just when plants were spreading on land. And this increase in phosphorus had a devastating effect on ocean life. You see, phosphorus is an important nutrient for plants, but in normal conditions, there's not much of it in the ocean. Since plants can't get phosphorus unless rocks break down, the arrival of land plants suddenly released a lot of it. This caused a massive algae bloom. At first, this might seem like a good thing, but it wasn't. When algae grow too much, they eventually die and decay. Bacteria break them down, but in the process they use up a lot of oxygen in the water. This led to the oceans becoming hypoxic, low in oxygen, or even anoxic, completely without oxygen. And since marine animals need oxygen to survive, this caused a huge die-off of sea creatures. But that wasn't the only problem. Oxygen-poor oceans also trapped carbon that would normally escape into the air as carbon dioxide, CO2. With less CO2 in the atmosphere, less heat was trapped, and the Earth cooled down quickly. Scientists can see proof of this in the geologic record. In places like China and northern Africa, they have found black shale deposits from the late Ordovician, showing that carbon was getting buried instead of being released into the air. Still with me? By now you should have liked and subscribed. If not, why not? Okay. To be fair, early land plants weren't the only cause of this extinction. There were other major events happening at the same time. For example, the supercontinent Gondwana was shifting, creating new mountains like the Appalachians. This led to huge volcanic eruptions, which released gases into the air. Some scientists think these volcanic gases cause volcanic winters, a drop in temperature due to particles blocking sunlight. On top of that, acid rain from these eruptions probably eroded rocks, removing even more carbon dioxide from the air. This would have increased cooling even more. But what stands out the most is how fast the planet cooled. From about 488 million years ago, temperatures started dropping rapidly over the next 44 million years, which is very fast in geologic time. Scientists think this means that something else, like the spread of plants, was speeding up the process. Even though these tiny plants played a role in a huge extinction event, we shouldn't blame them. In fact, their arrival paved the way for life on land. They helped create soil, which later allowed bigger and more complex plants to grow. They also released oxygen into the air, eventually making the atmosphere more like the one we breathe today. Over time, plants evolved. Their roots grew deeper, their structures became more advanced, and some developed vascular systems that let them transport water and nutrients. Later, the rise of flowering plants completely changed Earth's landscape, giving rise to the plants we eat and use today. If it weren't for these tiny pioneering plants, Earth might still be a barren, rocky planet covered in bacteria. So even though they played a part in a mass extinction, they also made life on land possible. Thanks for watching.